rotation imminent, I wanted to celebrate one of the cards being banished to Eternal. The most versatile card Riot has ever produced, a meta-dominant pick that has seen play in every tournament since its reveal. I'm of course talking about Vile Feast, the undisputed best card Riot has ever— What?
No one's going to watch a video about Vile
No one's going to watch a video about Vile Feast?
No, they're not.
Oh. Well, I guess I can just cover TF then. Twisted Fate was among the 11 champions revealed in the run-up to Rising Tide. With this being Runeterra's first season out of beta, Riot gave us a vast array of deck styles for the pirates to play with. From the mid-range blowout of Plunder to Lee Sin OTKing your Nexus to swimming with some sea monsters, everyone has a place in the metagame. However, it was easy to notice that some champions were fixed to their archetypes, for example Maokai and Quinn, whereas others had a package so versatile that decks were cutting great cards just to fit them in, namely Misfortune and Twisted Fate. What do I mean by versatility though? TF's playability lets him choose from 3 cards, with each being highly impactful. If you need to deal board-wide damage and hit the Nexus, red card. If you needed to punish development of larger units, gold card was always a threat, and if you're margin bait, blue card was always there to cycle through your deck. Twisted Fate fell into a similar category as Deny. If 4 unit mana was up, you always had to spend extra time considering how to invest your resources. And that's before the champion had even leveled. Released Twisted Fate only required him to see 8 cards drawn, an even easier feat to achieve when you consider that Picker card, his signature spell, drew 3 fleeting at the next round start, progressing his level up by half in a turn. Combine that with PNZ's Rummage only costing 1 mana, and you can see why turbo leveling TF was so easy to do. As a whole, TF's followers were a fine addition to his archetype, with Pool Shark and Yordle Grifter being the only 2 followers to see consistent play. Brash Gambler is too expensive in both cost and resources to see any success, and his spells, much like Poppy's support cards, are weird. Excluding Picker card, these spells are so lackluster. Sleight of Hand requires Plunder, which means it's not even playable in a lot of situations, and Pocket Aces rewards quick attackers, of which bilge decks don't have any except for TF himself, who you're not going to put in danger of combat. One spell that he brought to the table, however, was meta shaping. The original Pilfered Goods only cost 2 and was one of the main pain points for players in the few weeks into the expansion. A 2 mana draw 2 will always be strong, and this access to cheap hand advantage, paired with the fact that you are taking the opponent's win con from the top of their deck, helps cement another staple tier 1 Twisted Fate card. Now, first a disclaimer. The early days of Runeterra had barely any info surrounding it. Only a few sites were available for brewing and meta snapshots, and articles about the strongest decks were sparse and few between. This led to seasons of Plunder and Fortune being pretty empty when it comes to the history of it. The seasonals didn't exist at that point to allow us to judge the most competitive decks, so if I missed your fave deck from back then, sorry, but I did try. Kicking us off was the pre-built deck of Gangplank TF aggro. This was a pretty simple aggressive deck, utilizing the powerhouse of Petty Officer to blow away your opponent's wide boards from the Keg plus red card or Make It Rain combo, and press for face damage. In order to close out matches that were going a bit too long, you also had the pre-nerf Riptide Rex on turn 8. This strategy was particularly strong into the meta staple at the time of Karma Lux Control, as they had no pings to remove the kegs, unless we're counting Purify, and allow you to set up the strong turn 6 blowout as they ran very few units. Unfortunately, Ezreal was the king of the meta, and Mono Ez with Freljord ruined your game plan, and this feels weird to say, Elnuks were too good at stopping you swinging with a wide board, as their high health meant red card couldn't deal with them. At this point, Twisted Fate was used aggressively, normally being used as a plunder target for nab spells and TF progression. Throughout Rising Tides, TF was an underutilized pick, This was mostly due to the fact most players were running a lot more Misfortune as a cheaper and better bodied champion to progress a Sejuani or Gangplank list's game plan. This was crucial in Sejuani decks as Elusive and Shadow Isles aggro was everywhere and the board-wide Frostbite from her level 2 shut them out. So, TF had a slow start out of the gates, and throughout Cosmic Creations he remained that way, except he was finding his way into bilge decks that lacked interaction, as the Lee Sin buffs on patch 110 created a monster, and preventing the OTK by a turn was crucial for mid-range pirate decks. Even with this tech, TF was only picked a handful of times in the European Masters, as the presence of control decks such as Starspring, Heimervi, and Lux in various forms effectively shut down the pirate game plan. With the launch of Monuments of Power, TF took another hit as Make It Rain was taken out back after the community complained about the random nature of the card. That's right, Make It Rain's randomness was frustrating enough to get it nerfed, but Twisted Fate would burst out of the shadows in the next patch, as a very special assortment of cards were added to celebrate everyone's favourite virtual K-pop band, KDA. One of these cards single-handedly pushed TF into the S tier of competitive play. I'm of course talking about Go Hard. TF Elise Go Hard was an absolute powerhouse of a deck, utilizing a strong early board presence to push face damage and then transitioning into a burn playstyle from Pack Your Bags and Doom Beast to close out the match. This deck was everywhere. Remember, this was pre-nerf Pack Your Bags, which only cost 1 mana and could be pulled from your deck by Zap Sprayfin. Go Hard had a solid foundation in the meta, mostly due to how effectively it could deal with discard aggro, a staple deck in high elo. There were many variations of the deck, with Spirit Leech and Double Up sneaking in as tech choices. Go Hard TF was a dominant pick at the first seasonals, and it was rare to see a lineup that didn't either run it or a direct counter to it. The most popular counter though was another one of the KDA cards, Feel the Rush, as the board clear of Freljord and Shadow Isles was too oppressive and FTR decks ran very few units, so cycling Go Hards became very difficult. In the Americas seasonals, Pushy P took the title by demolishing Helpless Victims' Dragon List. Go Hard stayed at the top of the power rankings until patch 2.0, where Pack Your Bags was nerfed from 1 to 5 mana, a huge hit to the deck which pushed it from S to B tier. Though this hit was rough, Cosmic Creations added a few new cards which would produce the most powerful Twisted Fate deck we've ever seen. That is, the unassuming 6 mana 2/1 unit Wiggly Burblefish, and the powerhouse of release Ballistic Bot. Ballistic Bot released as a 1/3 and had a decent body for a 2-drop even before it procs Augment. The purpose of this deck was to have Elusives suit up, to have high attack and chip the Nexus, while comboing them with the 1 mana Rummage and TS Picker card to level him in 2 turns. It made TF a kill on sight champ similar to Viego or Heimerdinger. And in case an army of Burblefish cloned by iterative improvement wasn't enough to end the game, Mind Meld would transform your board into 15 15s and give you a near guaranteed lethal. This deck has been hailed as one of the strongest decks Runeterra has ever seen, as it felt so oppressive to try and shut down Fizz and the Elusives while banking resources to kill Twisted Fate at the same time. Maybe what pushes the bias is that this was the deck to shut down Lee Sin Zoe, as TF was free to level due to the lack of damage spells or challenges outside of Lee. This deck only got stronger with the introduction of Stress Defense, both as a discard fodder and to remove fleeting off of the cards drawn by Picker card. At its peak, this deck held a 57% win rate over all ranks, a disgustingly high win rate for a deck considered to be difficult to pilot. It was looking good for Twisted Fate, but then, after a surprise reveal, it looked great. Aphelios burst onto the scene and immediately found kinship alongside TF. Bilgewater and Aphelios together were a brutal combo, as Crescendum pulled Boxtopus out of the deck as a 3-4 challenger, which is frankly obscene. This was a slower game plan than the Fizz variation, but was able to utilize the Veiled Temple to delay the game with mana regeneration and moon weapon cycling, until Star Shaping created your win con. Both these decks dominated competitive play. If you weren't running TF Fizz, you were running the Aphelios variant. TF Fizz was still considered stronger of the two, and was run by about 2/3 of a European's top cut during the Cosmic Creation Seasonal. Twisted Fate was the undisputed king of the meta, and there was a mass outcry to nerf him. He was eventually hit with the nerf bat in patch 2.5, raising his level up requirement and changing pick a card from drawing 3 to 2 cards. This was rough for him, and paired with the various hits to Aphelios and his package, TF Aphelios was dead in the water. While during Empires of the Ascended, some players flirted with a TF Talia deck based on cloning TF using Ancient Hourglass, the list had no staying power and was too clunky of a combo to pull off. While TF Fizz was still being played by the best pilots of the deck, it was seen considerably less in tournaments. Nothing really changed for TF in the next expansion. There were no synergy points between him and the new cast of cards. However, with the arrival of Rise of the Underworlds, came a nerf to Rummage, changing it from 1 mana to 2, effectively killing TF Fizz for good. With the best draw cards in the deck hit, TF just couldn't level consistently anymore, and so the game plan fell apart. There were a few buffs to Bilgewater cards to compensate, Make It Rain and Black Market Merchant notably, which helped bring TF back to Gangplank as a viable plunder deck utilizing P&Z's package rose up, but wasn't able to contest the top of the meta. I want to add that while the original Pirate aggro deck was composed of Misfortune and Gangplank, copies of GP were slowly removed in favour of TF, and eventually Twisted Fate replaced Gangplank entirely in that deck. This was mostly due to the board clear that TF provided, enabled you to go wider than your opponent much earlier on in the match than Gangplank, and didn't really rely on a level up to be effective. No innovation came to the Card Master until the release of Beyond the Bandlewood and the overpowered Yordle followers that came with it. Lecturing Yordle getting a Poison Dart on summon was highly oppressive, and Stony Stackers being a tough unit with impact meant you were constantly pinging the enemy Nexus into submission. I believe Broken Ball was the first player to popularize Ping City, and the constant supply of ping spells made the deck so consistent it became a meta staple. It only increased in power after Shuriman aggro was nerfed in patch 2.15, alongside the release of Magical Misadventures. Now, we need to talk about Nami. On release, Nami's package was brutal, and this deck, first created by Drizzoff, dominated the ladder once set loose. A deck made by just jamming good cards together was incredibly flexible, and the Nami plus Burblefish combo was always a reliable finisher. Both these two decks, based on running solid cards, were meta contenders and went into the World Championship in high priority. Pink City was played more as Nami was generally paired with Zoe instead for a big Sparklefly strategy. It wasn't until patch 2.18, once Worlds was over, that Nami and Stone Stackers received nerfs, hitting both of TF's priority decks. After that, Twisted Fate fell to the wayside. Nami decks with him were still being run, but to much less success as Nami didn't come online until a turn later, and at that time he was only a one-off in Pirate aggro. Pink City was pretty dead after so many targeted nerfs, and that's the state TF rested in for a while. Sure, he was finding himself running a few bilge decks, but they were really only using him for his playability, making him a glorified spell. It's not until World Walker that another TF deck rose up through the ranks. I haven't talked about his pairing with Swain yet, because while it was always decent, the introduction of both Eye of Nagakaboris and later Heavy Metal gave everything this deck could ever want, even teching in Disintegrate if the meta was particularly tall. He also saw play in Ravenbloom decks, but was eventually eclipsed by Katarina due to her Blade's Edge generation. And that leads us finally to World Ender. Twisted Fate is only finding home in Pirate aggro, which at this point only runs 2 pirates, and that's about it. He's a troubling card because when he's meta, he's very dominant, and TF leveling most of the games he's played in is very unhealthy for the state of the game. It makes sense that he's being rotated, but it will leave a hole in Bilgewater without their best board clear and protection tool. We'll just have to see how the region switches up their game plan going into Glory for Navori.